Hello, and welcome everyone to View from Love. We're so excited to have you on this podcast journey of extraordinary love. Today's guest is visiting us from South Africa. She is a remarkable and awe-inspiring woman that I am truly honored for the world to get to know. Judith Kusel is a visionary, inspirational writer, a pyramid crystalline grid activator, and soul empowerment consultant. She is able to tap into cosmic superconsciousness fields and bring forth ancient cosmic wisdom. She has several acclaimed books available right now on Amazon, and she is someone you will truly want to get to know. So welcome, Judith Kusel. Welcome to View from Love. It's such an honor and pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And yeah, it's an honor and pleasure for me to be here today. Thank you so much. And hello to everybody who's listening in. Thank you very much.
So Judith, I would love it if you would give our audience just a bit of background about your journey and how you uncovered these incredible gifts.
Well, I was born in Africa, which was fine, for a very German missionary sort of like family background with a missionary family, as my family came from Germany in 1854. And, to bring the gospel to the Zulu nation and so on. So I've got a very sort of colorful family history in that regard. But also it is, then I sort of like, I've been very privileged in that I've always had parents that sort of were, love to explore. So we sort of love to explore, in Natal where I grew up in, the back sort of like Zululand and that area there. And the family farms are like sort of on the border between Swaziland and also Zululand. So there's a huge, rich history there, that has a lot to do with the British Empire and all the wars that they fought over else. Yeah. So for this whole sort of like spiel. But when you're born in Africa, you're also born into all the cultures that are here and also all the traditions, which are not just, the so-called white traditions, but also, the deep sort of depths of the Zulu and also the Swazi law and, what they believed in and so on. And I've been very lucky with that my parents always gave, it's because they could both speak fluent Zulu, would ask the Zulus, for their law or their myths or whatever, so that one could gain a deeper sort of understanding into the soul of Africa and what they believed in. And so when I was, when I was sort of in my 20s, I ended up in being librarian. And so I've been a librarian all my life and what was so beautiful about that, because I can see how I was prepared for this work that I'm doing now, because I always wanted to know the truth. I wanted to know the truth that resonates deeply within me. Now, you must remember, I grew up in the apartheid years in South Africa when there was this terrible division, between people and between races and so on. But underlying in all of this, I always thought to myself, there must be a greater purpose. There must be a greater sort of plan behind it all. What is that plan? And I was so fortunate because, nobody loved actually reading, the shelves of the nonfiction books. But I loved it because I would just ask a question and then the books would fall off the shelf and I would open the book and there literally was my answers. So I've always had these higher guides that came through and gave me answers. And later on, I was actually working with banned books. And then I always wanted to know, well, why did they ban the books? And I would read the books. And then myself, with that, you see, I started to my mind opened because I often had to read books that I would not normally read. But it also gave me the spiel that you cannot fence in people. You can't put them in boundaries, and say, okay, this is what you're allowed to read. That is not allowable and whatever, because I realized there was far more to everything and knowledge than you can ever put into form and being. And so what happened to me was when I was My whole life literally one day caved in as I walked into my office. And that was when the whole of South Africa went into the transition of the new government that took over, which was Nelson Mandela, etc. So we had what we called affirmative action in South Africa. They started putting, the black people back into power, their own way or so on. And, all my life, I've actually always been taught by my parents that a soul is a soul. It doesn't matter if they're pink or blue or green or whatever. And also to respect them as a soul. So when I walked into my office, and I was literally told by my junior staff that if I don't vacate my office within 2 hours, it shall be done for me. And I had no clue that this was imminent or that this would happen. But literally my whole life it was like the carpet was pulled from under my feet, and I was literally dangling in midair. And through this all, it became a court case, and I won the court case, but still nothing happened. And then I had death threats coming to me. So for the next 3 years, I was literally sort of dangling in this world where everything was collapsing. And in that moment when everything was collapsing, I started to see energy fields in the earth, and I ended up being in the archives of a Talana museum, where funnily the Irish soldiers, fought in the Boer War, and also, for the British, of course, and my own great-grandparents were involved on the Boer side because their farms were on the Boer side type of thing. And I was seeing these British soldiers as I was walking on the premises, and I used to get so jolly irritated with them because when they came, they would sort of like stamp their heels and start saluting me and say, "Ma'am," And I thought I was really going bonkers with all of this, because I come from this very strict Lutheran background, where you don't speak about psychic abilities and you don't see things like that because, this was shoes by the church. And I mean, I've always been very involved in the church, in all ways and so on, in choirs and Sunday school, you name it, and whatever. So here I was, and suddenly my third eye is open. I'm seeing these ones. I didn't know what to do with them. And then to crown it all, the museum curator, because you see, we had all these British soldiers and regiments were shipped out from Iraq and directly into South Africa and into the battlefields of Natal. And unfortunately, that area where I was in, at all the battles that you can think of, was I never understood how they all were like attracted to that area. So, and then I was actually sort of dealing with living soldiers, and I was dealing with these ones that had long gone, It was quite something, and then the curator just said, well, this is a commemoration of the Battle of Talana. You will lead us up this hill. Now, you have to remember at evening time, because she wanted it at evening time that we go up this mountain of Talana. Because they always say that the Boer horses used to come at midnight, sort of over from the other side and collecting their dead by moonlight. So these ghosts would appear, whatever. So she said, oh, the BBC is coming, by the way, and you'll have you will have a microphone strapped onto you so that you can give a running, commentary of the battle. I said to her, I can't do that. I can't, it's impossible. She said, well, you will do it, So there I was now. And one of the regiments had come out from Iraq exactly on that day to be there with that commemoration. And and as far as I can't remember what regiment it was anyway. So now I am going up this hill. Luckily for me, I had two South African ex-soldiers with me who were in the Boer, in the Angola War. One was our museum tour guide, and the other one was a photographer called Stephen. And Stephen had brought his wife with him, and she she was actually also psychic, but she saw the horses that were involved in the war. And I tell you what, it was the greatest nightmare of my life. I was seeing this battle in technicolor detail. And what was even worse is that at a certain time, the British artillery actually bombarded their own people, you know, so you can imagine what happened there. Anyway, so the only way I stayed sane is because Jan was seeing the horses, and because I had the South African soldiers with me, and I had 2 British soldiers with me. One was a officer, and the other one was a woman. So a man soldier and a woman soldier. And so they were literally escorting me up this hill. And meantime, you know, everything that I said was being recorded, and the cameras were on me. And this was nightmare of my life. And then, you know, we actually were on top of that hill. And Stephen, with his camera, actually captured the British soldiers moving between us on a photograph. So they were right there. And I tell you exactly at midnight, the horses came through from the soldiers, from the Boer forces. You could actually hear them, you know, clip clop, you know, as they came up the hill. But in any case, now we had to get down this jolly mountain again. And again, it was these soldiers that were with me. And then this British soldier actually came up and he told me, you know what? He says, we go into war these days. We don't even see the enemies. We've got visors on, you know, and literally don't know them. But he says, you know what you are picking up is your sixth sense. He says you are using your psychic abilities, and that's why you can see them. You know, it brought me such comfort in that moment that I wasn't going, you know, stark bonkers here and whatever else. But it was interesting because Stephen, you know, he said to me, you know, Judy, you need help. I said, yes, I do need help very much, because I don't know what to do with all these things. And I don't want all these soldiers around me all the time, you know, clicking the user. Whatever, because it's interesting, because as the battle sort of date came near, more and more soldiers appeared on the premises, you know. And then he brought to me a friend who's actually now my editor, Jill, and she's very psychic, and she said, but Judith, you know, you're not imagining these, you know. He says these soldiers are actually drawn to you because of your light, and they want you to release them because they're stuck here. I said, me? He said, yes, you. I said, no, it can't possibly be. Please tell them to go away. I'm not going to help them. In any case, it's so interesting that the curator went overseas for 3 months, and I had this whole sort of upper floor to myself of the museum, and they came to my office one by one. And of course, the British kept records of everybody, you know, very things that. So I would actually ask them their name. I would ask them their rank, so that I can go and look up in the records, you know. So I knew I wasn't imagining things. And then I would ask them, okay, what is their story? And most of them, it was because, you see, they just newly come to South Africa. They were actually put here on fire, and they were having breakfast when the Boers started sort of bombarding them from the top of the hill. So, and then their stories came out, and it was unfinished business, you know, like they hadn't sort of like said goodbye to their loved ones, or they were worried about the wives or the girlfriends or something that were in Ireland or wherever they were. And because some of them were the Dublin Fusiliers, etc. So, and then, you know, once they actually were sort of like realized, you know, that the girlfriend doesn't exist anymore, because this is 100 years later, etc. And the lights, they saw the light. The angels could help them to be released, and then they were just gone. And I'll never forget that one day, it was in October, you know, when the first spring rain fell, you know, after the winter, and the spring flowers sort of like blossomed through. I came to the museum, and there was a little bit of mist still, but then this shaft of sunlight came down. as I stopped my car and I got out of it. And then they were all there and they were saluting me.
Oh.
And I just said, thank you. You know, they were saying thank you. But then they disappeared. They were not there anymore. So they were released. So I had done the work. But after that, I was brought back to the library and so on. And then I just one day knew I can't go on like this. You know, it's just, no, my life is not the same anymore. I can't go on. And then I was nearing a nervous breakdown, and the doctor just said to me, you know, Judith, you can actually take your life back or you can have a nervous breakdown. You've got a choice. And that's I prayed about it, and I said, well, what now? And I will never forget, because it's one of those defining moments in my life, you know, where I was literally taken by my guides, you know, right up on top of a huge mountain. And there was this huge cliff, you know, so I was standing at the edge of this cliff. And there, right in the valley below, there were these thousands of people, you know, in the valley below. And they said to me, do you see all those people in the valley below? They are waiting for you to finally do the work that you've actually incarnated to do. How long are you going to stand here and not have the guts to actually get off this cliff? And then I was shown, how does an eagle learn to fly? And literally by a mother kicking it out of its nest. And it was just the next day I put in my resignation, and it was just like this weight has come off my shoulders. And so I waited now for my pension money to be paid out and so on. And then and in the meantime, I knew that I needed healing. And then about 3 months later, I was in Santon and at Dr. DeMartini's a breakthrough experience, which helped me to just get all this emotional stuff balanced out and so on. And then I knew that I was called to just go on a journey, you know, because I was now seeing all these energy fields and tapping into history suddenly, that I didn't know what to do this. But I just knew I had to get into my car and start the journey, because I was seeing crystal pyramid temples. I was seeing, they told me to get a map of Africa out. So there's a map of Africa out. And there I'm drawing energy lines, you know, on the corner of Africa and South Africa and I had no clue what I was doing. And then in the process, I said, well, where do I start this journey? And they said, well, I'll take a map out. So here on my map of South Africa again. And then my pencil actually ended up exactly where I'm living now. And that is where I started my journey. I'd never been to this part of Western Cape before, but of this here. And when I got here, I immediately started tapping into the crystal pyramid temples, was under the ocean, and the ones that are still in the mountains here. And then I realized that this is very ancient history that I was starting to tap into, and energy fields that have been there in the very beginning. And I started to realize that the line that I was drawing down Africa was actually the 33 longitude line, and that is the spinal column of the earth, and that all these pyramids, etc., actually like click into this massive crystalline grid. And as the journey progressed, and I was going through, this, and what's so amazing about this, every time that I had information coming about it, the confirmation would come. For instance, I was reading about a Swedish botanist who was the first of the botanists that came when the British settlers came to Port Elizabeth, and he actually went he's the first that went inland, into where the Transkei and Ciskei are. And he actually recorded that there were these massive megalithic stones that went for miles straight north. And that's exactly where the 33-degree longitude are. And so this whole journey started, and eventually I ended up in, the Natal Drakensberg, where I was born anyway, has always been, one of those places where people knew there were much more things going on than meets the eye. I mean, my family farms, they always knew that when during the Zulus would actually steal their cattle, and then the cattle would just disappear, like in an eye wink, until they actually realized they put them in underground tunnels, and then they would come out, many miles further, but the cattle would appear. And so the Zulus knew all these tunnels and things and systems that were sort of underground and came out somewhere else. And with it, the museum curator, this museum caretaker, he was actually ex-South African army guy. Now, they don't spin stories, but he actually told me a very interesting story. That was before I went on this journey. And he said, Judith, you won't believe me, but he said, we had a family farm, a hunting farm. He came from the same area as I was, but, out in the Lebombo Mountains, because the Lebombo Mountains go right up, the Kruger Park, right up into Mozambique area to Zimbabwe. And he said we had hunting grounds there. And he said one day my brother and I were hunting. And he says the next minute we saw these beautiful steps going up a cliff, and that they looked like they hewn out. And we were curious, so we went up the steps. And he said we got to a platform, beautiful platform, like it was beautifully polished and hewed out. And there was a fountain in the middle, and somebody had it looked like they were eating there. And he said, my brother and I looked around and we said, but goodness me, what's this place? I mean, it's incredible. And he said, well, there must be a door here. And he started to sort of bang on the walls. And the next minute, this door opened. And then he got such a fright. They both got such a fright that they just ran down the mountain again. So that night, their grandfather said, why are you so quiet? And they didn't want to tell the grandfather what had happened. And eventually they told him, and he just laughed. And he said, oh, you found that place, did you? They said, well, there's more than that to that place than you will think of, So he said the next year he finally got the courage to go back again. And this time there wasn't any food there. He said, but he knocked on the thing and found the door. And the door opened. And as he opened, there was this very tall, red-haired man with his red hair in a top knot. And that's sort of like a giant. And it was saying, come in. And he said, I knew that if I had stepped over the threshold, I would never have returned back to my normal life again. And he said, then I freaked out and I ran away. So I knew that these things that I were now tapping into had far more to it than meets the eye. And with that, I was starting to tap into the ancient history of Elysium, the first civilization on Earth, where these crystal pyramid temples and the crystalline pyramid temple grids were actually connected like one power grid. And you could literally, so they were highly sophisticated civilization. And what happened to them in the end is, and Africa holds that, Africa, there was just one single continent then. And in other words, you didn't have like many continents, you just had one. And the geologists actually confirm that because they say it's a supercontinent. And here where I live, for instance, we've got very high mountains that just rise off the coastal plain. You don't have any, they just go like that. And the geologists will tell you that the landmass tore off, okay, and then what tore off went underneath that and lifted the whole thing. But if you actually look at this, it literally tells you that the islands offshore from it, like Mauritius and Madagascar and so on, were all part of the African continent. But even Australia was part of the African continent. That's why if you look at the botanists, we've got the same trees and the same sort of species that are in Perth area are here in South Africa. So we literally sort of like fit in somewhere along the line. And Antarctica also fits in. So with this, I started to write down the whole history of, we've got I was led to the oldest stone circle in the world, which is right up on the escarpment again of a Drakensberg. And it's actually 250,000 years, which they have sort of established. And I tell you what, I went there with Michael Tillinger, who's done a lot of research for it, because they only found it when a plane crashed. And then this pilot, Johann Heine, couldn't find, the plane. And in that, he had to fly over this. And then he suddenly saw, but goodness me, what's going on here? There's circles and things here. But then they found the plane somewhere else. But he promised himself he will go back to there and see what it is. And they found this, and it's absolutely aligned. And if you go into the middle of a circle, no compass works there. No satellite connection works there. Everything is blocked out. And there are two standing stones like this, That day when I went with Michael, he said to me, well, go into the middle. I said, Michael, I will not go into the middle there, because if I go into the middle, I know I'll teleport it out of here. Anyway, so that's my whole journey, and that's how everything started, and that's the book that was published, that's why I was born in Africa. But through this all, I've had so much confirmation coming, not only from the botanists, but also the geologists that are trying to now to press everything together. But do not go and ask the archaeologists, because they just don't want to, they stick to their stories and they won't move to the stories there. Like they always classify everything as Stone Age. But even here in this area, they found such sophisticated tools that no one can put them into the Stone Age, but they will not budge on that like they do in the rest of the world. And from where the stone circle is in South Africa, there are circles and circles and circles. And if you look at them from the air, they make a beautiful somatic pattern. Now, somatics is when you put sound onto certain sort of like like patterns. Sound makes patterns, and they're exactly that pattern. So how on earth did they do them? And I tell those, then the archaeologists to say they're cattle kraals, but how can cattle jump over a huge wall, a stone wall? It's impossible. They need a gate somewhere along the line. And these go right into Zimbabwe, up to the Zimbabwe ruins. And they found gold there, which is so, my brother is an archaeologist and he showed it to me. They found this rhinoceros, which now is at the University of Pretoria in their archives. It is absolutely beautifully crafted. You cannot do that by hand. He showed me some of the pearl of a beads that they found, the gold beads. They're absolutely 100% round. You only can see them through the microscope, and then they have a hole perfectly in the middle. In any case, that's my whole story.
Wow. Yeah. And Judith, just going back to the whole, it's kind of like an awakening within you, even about Elysium, I can imagine, because it's not like that was a part of your childhood history or any of that. How did that actually start coming online for you, like being able to articulate it? Because I have looked at your book, and it's a beautiful book. And I feel that people who maybe aren't so accustomed to translating their own intuitive gifts in such an articulate and practical way, I was just kind of wondering how that ability started to happen for you as you were taking in this ancient knowledge that you knew was brand new, to who you would share it with, and also to you in that given moment as you were, as it started to come in. Like, what was the moment that you knew this was Elysium, this information?
It was actually as I was going, on it was, I would often sort of like a drive, through South Africa is very big, but you drive through it. And then I was actually seeing the landscape as it was in that time, you see.
Yes.
And then I would actually, when I got stopped somewhere, like in a coffee shop and had lunch or something, write in my journal and then make sketches, of what I was. I would record the date and whatever was given to me. And I remember that and then what I also did is that I would then at nighttime, just go and make sure that I had actually written everything down that was given to me, and then it is so interesting because when I first started, going to this area, I went through the Karoo, and I could see that the Karoo, which is very dry, sort of arid, semi-desert or some desert really in some places, I could see that was actually once islands on an inland sea, you see. It was literally like I could see the sea and I could see the dinosaurs and things like that on it. And that same evening, I'm in a bed and breakfast, and there was this geologist report stating exactly that. And I was okay, you see, I'm not imagining that. So that actually started giving me confidence that I was not imagining this, that it's really true. And I mean, the geologists can read the earth because everything is recorded in the earth, you see. Every rock records everything that's happened in the earth. So the geologists can read more than anybody else because of the layers of the earth, you see. Everything is layered. And there they found dinosaur bones, and they found, sort of like seashells and things like that, fossils that you can't find anywhere else. I mean, how did they get there?
Yes, ocean life.
Ocean life. So you see, it's and I mean, you drive through the Karoo. There's pyramids there, everywhere. And so I just look at them, pyramids, falling. But you see, if you have like if you can imagine, that the earth has gone through so many catastrophes. And every time that the catastrophes happened, you would often have these places buried, because of water or because of erosion or sandstorms or earthquakes or whatever happened. So a lot of these places, which are actually very sacred places, lie buried. They're either buried under the ocean or they're buried, under the sand and whatever else. But if they're still there, it's not that they are not there. If you start actually, most of the sacred places on earth where people flock to, like the pyramids and so on, in Egypt, are actually built on something that is much older. If I was in Egypt in 2019, I mean, you can see these massive megalithic blocks, and then you see smaller blocks on top of it. So in other words, it must show you that and I was standing at the Saqqara pyramids, which is the oldest pyramid in Egypt, and we were picking up seashells there, so it shows you that it was underwater at some stage, but where do you find the archaeologists telling you they don't? I mean, there's people that actually like, what's his name, Schoch. I mean, he's proven that the Sphinx was underwater at some stage because of the erosion. But they just deny it. They say it's not so. But there in Egypt, you can pick up these seashells. Right next to the pyramids. But you see, the thing is with Elysium was actually when the wars of heaven broke out. Now, the wars of heaven, if you actually read the ancient mythology and the ancient scripts, they all tell of the terrible wars of heaven. And they actually had to vacate the whole earth, because you see, the earth at that stage was an experiment, because the inner earth, Agartha, was the first civilization. And they're still there, but they are in a much higher frequency than we are, the seventh dimension. And so those are inner earth, but that was a satellite, because they needed a satellite station, when they went from one place to the other. Okay. And our solar system at that stage was still attached with a galaxy into to another sun, the central sun. So it was completely a different type of universe that we're looking at. And with that, when the wars of heaven started, And now before the Wars of Heaven, when they started to bring in, and create the outer earth, if you reach a certain degree of evolution, you step into co-creatorship. And then you co-create with the divine, okay? You're not the divine as such, but you co-create with the divine. So they put the autocrust in, and in the autocrust, and that's recorded by Thoth, the Hermetic teachings, that they put down the web of life, okay? So they actually put the energy grids in. So the pyramids were built like on those energy grids, so they became like powerhouses of energy. And then what happened was the people that put them in, the scientists, like you had the Pleiadians bringing in the plant and tree and animal life, okay? You had from other star systems, you had these species coming in, and it was all an experiment. And then the scientists actually said, well, we love this earth. She was so beautiful that everybody said she was the crown jewel of creation that went past here. That was how beautiful she was at that stage. And they fell in love with her. And they said, well, can we please settle here? So the Intergalactic Council said, yeah, you can settle here, but you need to sign a contract here that you're taking part in an experiment. And we need to remember that as souls, we're taking part in an experiment, okay? If you start to understand that, you also understand that if you're on planet Earth, you always volunteer to come here and you volunteer to take part in an experiment. So that is what life is about. And when the Wars of Heaven came, they had to vacate them with the motherships, etc. It was just in time because there was a huge war that broke out between Mars, where Mars is today, and Jupiter, and that planet blew itself up. Okay, now you can imagine what chaos it happened, because it wasn't just this planet that blew it up. There were galaxies that were actually blown up, and star systems and whatever. It goes beyond anything that we can even think of a Star Wars. But what happened was that this whole solar system was thrown out of orbit. Now you must remember, you don't just have one solar system, you've got a counter solar system. You've got a galaxy and a counter galaxy, because everything is always balanced. So the outer Earth was nearly sort of like gone by that time, and just the inner Earth survived because we were thrown right out of orbit. And with that, the Milky Way galaxy was thrown off out of orbit too, because it's not with the central sun it was originally with. So this is chaos now in heaven. So it took many millions of years before that all settled and the spaceship could move again, and the motherships, etc. And this comes out in my soul readings very much, because there were 12 master galaxies that were originally created by the divine, that we all belong to. So the souls that are on Earth are from these 12 master galaxies. So it tells you that we are in a cycle where we always went and actually came back to Earth and moved into Earth and actually moved through the cycles of time, through creating and recreating through all the things. That's why we all have some or other recall of what was past, or what is there in that, not this present, but also the other time. But you also are in a future time as well, because they all exist at the same time. But in that, the Lyrans, which I call the lion people because they appeared to me, they were very, very tall race. They had copper skin and they had red hair, and they wore that red hair in a top knot. And this man actually appeared to me here at Cureworms, which is just the next beach here. And they actually were the master architects and engineers of the universe. And they came because their galaxy was blown up. They couldn't go back to that. They fled to Sirius. And then they asked the intergalactic councils, can we please settle on Earth, that we can just gather ourselves again. And so they started the next civilization on what remained of Elysium, in other words, what survived of Elysium. And by that time, little bits of a supercontinent had sort of gone off, but the main part was still there. For instance, in Europe, you didn't have the Atlantic Ocean and you didn't have the Mediterranean Ocean. It was one. Okay. So if you want to understand European history, you've always got to understand that they were always part of the African mainland. So where the islands and things are now, they were actually part of the same land. And America was still attached to North Africa, so on. So it's when I was working in France, in Karnak, for instance, I could see, how everything connected, like Ireland and Britain and all connected, to France and the continents there. So and also Portugal, the islands like the Azores and so on was all part of Portugal. There was not a sea there. So you can imagine that when all these catastrophes happened, like Great Flood after when the Atlantis fall, how the whole earth has changed. It's just come apart. But Africa has remained steady. That's why Africa still holds, the whole earth, the whole energy in its greatest capacity in that. And when you get into these energy centers in Africa, you are tapping into the very first and the Lion Kingdom. It's almost like it holds it still. And the thing is, what Africa actually has, which is unique, is that they've always held that in a way that Europe and so on never could. So there's something which is so ancient about Africa that you cannot even sort of like pinpoint it. It's there in the landscape. It's there in the whole energy that is here, which is totally different from Europe or any other place. To me that just now with this great awakening which is happening, as we are all awakening, those energy centers are all awakened. And it's literally pulsating now to us from the earth as she is awakened, and the spinal column is awakened, and new earth is now fully present because the old earth does not exist anymore. From the 5th of July, 2020, the old earth has now split from the new earth. And so we are in a tremendous time of transition now. And that is why this is a mass awakening now of humanity. And with this whole lockdown thing that happened, people are now starting to really come back to their roots and question, why am I here on planet Earth? So like I was questioning at that stage when my whole life caved in and my psychic energy opened. I was asking, why the heck was I born in Africa? I'm a 5th generation of African German. Why wasn't I born in Germany? But since then, when I've actually tapped into this, I say, thank you. Thank you. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. So, yeah.
You can actually tap into the divine perfection of your soul and the choice to be born there. Judith, so many people share about right now, they don't know kind of what's going on, but they know things are different and the world is changing. People talk about having a lot of dreams, and a lot of people's dreams actually are matching others' dreams, dreams of great tsunamis, of, big collapses of Earth and eruptions of volcanoes and all of that kind of stuff. And we are seeing a little bit of that even happening in the world right now with the big volcanic eruption underwater near Tonga and a lot more earthquakes and things like that. And I was just wondering your perspective from the higher frequency and the higher dimensional vantage point, like how are you seeing all of that as a part of our current evolution? Like where's humanity headed in the new?
Well, those earthquakes and things will continue to happen. What's happening is that a lot of souls were Atlantean souls and Lemurian souls, especially where you are, in Hawaii, Lemuria, Mu. And the thing is that there's a lot of that old karma, there's old negative karma, which is coming up from Lemuria and from Atlantis. And that is, all this which is now happening is actually exactly what happened before when Atlantis fell. And because the Atlanteans caused the fall of the Lemurians. And so, in other words, when the Atlanteans actually got to the stage where they placed control boxes into people, and they actually implanted them here in your cranium area where they block off your higher transmitter channels, you know, that divine divinity that comes into you for your whole energy systems. They started to sow the seeds of separation in humankind. In other words, we were separated from the divine. We were separated from each other. We even separated from ourselves because we forgot who we were. We forgot we were souls and we are infinite, and that the divine lives within us because the kingdom of heaven lives within you. It doesn't live outside you. It's inside you. So we were in the stage where the whole of the Atlanteans were actually tapped into a mainframe computer, and they were remotely controlled through these control boxes. But the priesthood of Atlantis never allowed themselves to be corrupted. Okay. But in the meantime, the Lemurians had reached a much higher civilization than the Atlanteans. They were about seventh dimensional. Atlanteans fifth. Okay. So the Lemurians were actually androgynous race. They were male and female in one single body. Okay. So, and that's not unusual because in other galaxies and star systems, you do have androgynous races. So the Lemurians actually, they didn't need to have a mate, you know, to procreate. They could procreate on their own. Okay. And this was like literally putting, a seed into a sort of like a container and like a tube, and then the baby would be perfectly formed, come out, and there would be no trauma at birth, you see. And then the Atlanteans were male and female separate. So when the Atlanteans started all this nonsense about, you know, controlling people and wanting to sort of like do with them what they wanted, they actually said, okay, we want now what the Lemurians have, okay, because the Lemurians had higher civilization, higher methods of building, etc. They wanted that, you see. But they couldn't get to the Lemurians in any other way than actually convincing them that they were losing out on something that the Atlanteans had, you see. So that's where the Bible story of Adam and Eve comes in. And they said, well, you know what? You are losing out. God made a very, very great mistake with you, putting you both sexes in one body, you know. You are losing out on sex, you see. So some of the Lemurians actually started falling for that, you see. And then one of the Atlanteans actually got this wonderful, it's not wonderful in the thing, the idea that they could actually split the Lemurians in half, you see, and then they would have male and female. So this machine was devised, and the Lemurians started splitting, you know. They literally went through this machine and split it, okay? But then they found the great tragedy was that once they were split, they couldn't get back together again, no matter how much they tried. So you had this huge like separation now, that no matter how much you tried, you couldn't get back to your other half again. So that was actually the time when this happened, that they got into such trauma that the Atlanteans literally could do with them what they wanted to. And because of all of this, you see, that is where they started, you know, using atomic lasers, and they started to blow up, you know, parts of their own continent. They blew up everything. And that's when it just was said, okay, they were on the case of actually blowing up the earth when when God and everybody interfered and said, we said in the wars of heaven that no one will ever be allowed to actually blow up a planet or a constellation or whatever ever again. And that's when the great floods happened. But in the meantime, the ones that had actually stayed true to the law of one, they already foresaw this, the priesthood, etc. And that's why they started these pockets of civilizations or of underground in the tunnel system, so that when the floods had subsided, that they would start bringing these back. One of them is the kahunas of Hawaii. because one of the high priests and priestesses of Atlantis went specific to the Pacific Islands, and they actually started to bring that knowledge back to the people once the floods had actually subsided. Because now you must remember where Maui is, that's one of those places that still was part of Lemuria, and that's why you still have crystal pyramids on that island, etc. And there's lots of them in the Pacific. So there's a whole sort of like grids that goes on in the Pacific. Ireland, it was the same, because the Druids actually come back from a much, much more highly sophisticated background, which was that of Avalon, which was just after the Lion Kingdom fell, Avalon started. That was like where the North Sea is now, part of Norway still was part of that, and Ireland was still part of it. So sort of like in that, and part of it was still attached to the continents there, because if you look at Irish history, they always tell of the lands that were lost on the western side of Ireland. And so they were part of what was called the Wizards of Avalon, where they literally could still apply the knowledge of Elysium that they had, because they were still part of Elysium there. And they were the master manifestors. And what we would call magic today was actually nothing else but actually the ability to manipulate energy fields and to co-create with energy fields. So the Druidic tradition actually still held that in Ireland, in huge pockets of that, and also Wales and Scotland. So that tradition was actually held in such a way that also with Brittany in France, and also where the southern France area, so because they were all interrelated. So these pockets of knowledge was held, like Egypt was then held, and Greece was held. So they were all, and also in South America with the Incas and so on. So they were all over the world, these pockets held. But you must remember that at that stage they had to start civilization all over again. And it was only because of these ones that civilization actually started again for humankind. But now we had actually found from the fifth, we were right down into the third now, which is lower than the animals. So you see, at the moment, what's happening is we're rising again. We're going back to the beginning. We're going back to the fifth and the seventh, you see. But we first have got to get over this fear of what happened in Atlantis and understand that this time we will not repeat that, okay? Because a new earth is now already here. But we will now need to choose, okay? Do we allow ourselves to ascend now into that, which is, imagine that we were sunk into the third. Now we can get up again, right back to where we were. And that's the beauty of this time, that is why when your life starts falling apart, okay, when you start remembering what happened in Atlantis, we now need to say, okay, I will not allow what happened in Atlantis. I will start actually standing in the power of my own soul. Because every soul is so endowed with knowledge. Every soul is so uniquely made by the divine that when you start claiming your own divinity, nothing and no one can own you. Nobody can control you. You are the master of your own life. And that is now the greatest lesson in soul mastery that humanity has to go through. You know, I do soul readings and I've done them. That also came just suddenly to me when I realized I just needed to actually know people's names and their date of birth, and I can go right into their records, not the Akashic records, but the records that are held at the divine source. And it gives you your galaxy of origin, your star systems, and also every single soul has got its unique tone, it's got its colors. So in other words, your soul is so amazingly and divinely made that when you get into earthly realms, you forget about that. But this is a time of remembering the truth of who and what you in truth are. And to understand that, when I do my soul readings, people read it and they start bursting into tears. They say, I've always known this about myself. But what happens is when we get into the schooling systems, when we get, well-meaning parents, whatever, we are programmed to become who we are. And now it's a time to get rid of all those programs and start becoming truthful again and start to understand that you are so beautifully made and so uniquely made that nothing is missing. And then to stand in the truth of who you are. That's what this time is all about.
Beautiful.
That's so beautifully said, Judith, and so true. And, there are so many beautiful, brave hearts out there right now that are really moving through the waves of that, facing their fears, facing the things that are coming up in their human lives that are demanding more and more control, as within them, their own awakening, their own soul seeking its freedom, its sovereignty, and to express its truth, the love that it truly is. So many are on that path right now and really bravely, moment to moment and breath by breath, being guided. And you said it so beautifully too. It is like we're all divine, and that presence is always there. And this is a universe of love. This is an earth of love. This is a universe of love. We are participating in a symphony of love. And the more we lean into that remembrance and step further and further away from the fear and the old programming, the lighter we become as the light comes into the planet. It's all so beautiful. Like even all the words we could use, it all interplays. We are the light and we are the love and we are being lifted, and all of those things are true, just as we are going through our own daily human activities and perceived challenges.
The thing is, the more you become authentic and true to yourself, the more you will find that you are guided in ways that you wouldn't. You see, if you start getting your vibrational frequencies, that means the light of the divine and the love of the divine within you, and you start living it, the less the outside world can actually do anything with you. You literally rise above it. And that is what really is so beautiful about this time, is that although the challenges come, but we also now are helped to rise above it and to become it. And the greatest power is the power of love. There is no greater power than the power of love. And the divine love is unconditional. And that is also, it's a beauty of it, is when Atlantis fell, the patriarchy took totally over. And there was this imbalance because the feminine voice was so squashed, that the feminine couldn't even voice what was inside her. When I was in France, I was just called to France and said, we'll go to France. I said, well, what the heck am I going to do in France? and I was told, okay, I've got to do 7 seminars in France. I said, 7? I've never done a seminar overseas. How the heck am I going to do that? And it's so interesting because, as I went there, I was told that Mary Magdalene would appear to me, when I was in France, and also that I would be led to exactly where I need to do. And before, and I was also taking out a map of France, and I was putting all the energy lines in, and it was told, okay, they said, and you have to go here, and you have to go there, and you have to go there. And I said, and then interesting enough, Christina, who was actually also sort of like sent to me to help me, because I can't speak French, and also she's Swedish and she can speak French and she lives in France, and she actually offered to take me around, everywhere. So it's like, you see how everything always comes together. And she said at one stage, but Judith, you don't need to go that way. Why can't we go that way? And they said, no, you do it as we are told to do. So you see, if I'm told to do it, I'll do it. And it worked out exactly because we were tapping into this ancient history of Avalon, and also how these whole things are connected, You see, like Paris used to be a goddess site of the highest degrees. It used to be a sacred island that was in the middle of this beautiful sea, inland sea. But it was, but there were parts of it, which is part of Versailles, where Versailles is. That's at Versailles, there was a sun temple there. And I, for myself, isn't it interesting that Louis, the whatever it is, he goes and builds his sun temple there. But meantime, you know, it's you see somewhere in the background of the human mind, there is, of the human consciousness, there is always a remembrance at the very deep level of what was before. We might not be conscious of it, but it's still there in the subconscious of humankind. And, you know, as this whole thing unfolded, the whole journey unfolded, I also understood the terrible pain that was caused with the imbalance, you know, when the masculine took over. And I literally had to clear energy everywhere, you know, in France, you know, clear. And it was the trauma, the pain. And when I got to the south of France, where the greatest genocide of people that ever happened was in south of France, and it was the Cathars and the Templars, that with the Cathars and Templars were the same families. And they were holding the core truth of what was the feminine divine teachings. And apart from that, also with Mary Magdalene, who actually came from France, went through the mystery schools of France and was going mystery schools, and eventually ended up where her family also had holdings in Israel, because she came from a royal family. She, or a noble family, whatever you wanted to call it, she get back to her roots. That's why she brought that knowledge of the Essenes back to France. So, and actually she appeared to me the minute I came off the plane and I was in my hotel room. Mary Magdalene was there. So she was with me the whole time in France. But, you know, where all this trauma and pain happened, you know, as the crusade was launched against, you know, the Cathars. And I mean, big cities were just burnt down like Béziers and Carcassonne and those places. That's literally steeps into the earth. And you need to literally sort of like take that off, because wherever great trauma and pain it goes right into Mother Earth. And that is why we need to also now understand that as Mother Earth is cleaning herself, as she's cleansing herself, and the new earth is born, so much of those places also now need to be transfigured into something else. So fire actually transfigures, and water cleanses and clears. So we're in the great purification now of what has been before. But the beauty of it all is that once we bring this beautiful balance back with the divine feminine, are bringing that loving energy back, that unconditional loving, we are in a beautiful balance. And I found that when I was at Montsegur, because between my seminars, we decided to take the whole, everybody, I had about 30 at my seminars in France, and we decided we're going to take them all to Montsegur. It was just like a calling to go to Montsegur. And then, you know, I will never forget that day, but it was a day when I experienced what love in truth is. We went right up, you know, sort of, you've got to climb sort of up to get to the place where the it's like an altar, but it's actually a memory, what do you call it? They put a commemorative whatever there.
Yeah.
And then, but it looks actually like an altar, if you come to think of it. And I actually sat my students down and we had a short meditation there. And I said to them, you know what, every single one of you has got a connection to this place. I want you to go where your soul tells you to go. Follow your deepest guidance within, and then just go. Some of you will go up to the castle. Some of you will go somewhere else. It doesn't matter. Just go wherever you are called to go. And that day I was actually called to go sort of like round the sort of on a path that sort of led to the one side and then round the corner there. And as I stood there, I knew this was a very ancient path that led to the castle that is sort of like obscured, people that can't go that way anymore. But as I stood there, I felt the whole energy of the earth and this whole divine energy coming into me in the most beautiful way that I cannot explain. But in that same moment, now I lost my voice when I was for a year in the Middle East and I got teaching there, and I had severe laryngitis. And I was always singing in the choir, the high C. I couldn't sit it anymore. But anyway, I stood there for 20 minutes and this chant just came through me. It was just amazing. And what is amazing, I was standing here. There were some of my students that were down at the bottom where the hay balls were. And then there was a stream right at the bottom, and there were some white cows on the other side, and they had these big bells around them. The cows started to ring their bells as I was chanting. This chant went right down. Everybody could hear it. Okay. And then after that, I just knew that I had to go to the altar and we had to sing this chant in the group. But I also knew that we all had to make a prayer for humanity and actually put it there and put it in a sacred circle. And as one by one they came, I had Kathy from the Channel Islands, and she said I had exactly the same instruction and guidance. And we started it. And then as they all came from the different parts together now, because everybody had dispersed in different places, and everybody had a revelation that day that was out of this world. And we started singing this chant. And that place was filled with tourists that day. But there was this silence, just us singing. And even the children sat down and listened. And everybody, the adults didn't move. And as we were singing this, a flock of herons flew over. But in that very moment, I could see the last of the Qatars going joyfully singing and with love to their deaths. They were singing with joy and with love, going onto the stake where they all were burned to death. And I understood that there was no bitterness, there was no anger. There was just this joy, that inner joy and love, which was carrying them through. Those were such sacred moments that I'll never forget it. And to me, that dawned that if you are really in that higher state, you can only be love in the higher state. You can't be anything else.
Wow. Wow.
I feel that so deeply, Judith. I could feel as you were describing it, it all came to me in vision, and I could hear it and I can feel it in my own heart, and that radiating out, and how it penetrated through so many dimensions and veils and into the earth. And I know from my own experience too and feeling that what you say is true. And there are many of us that have been guided to places that feel the pain and tragedy and things that have happened in the land and with the people. And it's our soul bringing the presence of the divine unconditional love back to the land, to the earth, to even the people. Because I know that even the people now, as you say, on some unconscious level, people are guided to be living and placed where they are for purposes beyond what they think. And so everyone is participating in this grand orchestration of mass healing and awakening and returning to love. And when we express that and share that kind of thing here, it just penetrates so deeply. And I feel like it brings another layer of peace to hearts that are struggling, that are having more difficulty remembering that, oh yes, I'm here with greater purpose, and there is even love in the tragedy, right? I mean, there really is, and that was such a beautiful depiction of that, because it's very hard for humans who are dealing with, 3D level experiences to say, well, how can I bring love to this horrific situation? Someone just killed my family member, or somebody is trying to inject me, or someone is telling my child they can't go to school, whatever these things are. And they're looking at it from that point of view. I feel like it's incredibly helpful to be reminded from that heart level that it is, not only is it possible, it is. Like, it's even beyond saying, oh, it's essential or it's possible, because love is who and what we all truly are, our very being, the essence of all that is. And so Judith, I'm so blessed to have you here with the podcast today. And I'm feeling, if you would honor us with your presence again, I'd love to have you back to spend a little more time talking about your work with the white flame and the purification, which is so important and so timely for everything that humanity is going through right now. And also to just give people more of an experience of the divine feminine, which you embody so beautifully. So I know that there just wasn't enough time to tap into all the beautiful gifts that you emanate. But I think this was a fantastic introduction for people who, had not known of you, to get to know you. And I just so deeply appreciate everything that you shared. And we would be absolutely honored to have you back to share more soon.
That's so interesting, because today, just to round it off about the love part, I was actually sent sort of a video link today, and I follow Lars Moore. He's one of the Danish mystics very much, and in that, the whole thing was about the seer was the one that actually helped him to get into his loving part and back into the truth of who he was. But this whole video was about Monsegur. I thought to myself, so interesting that Monsegur comes up today. And as this was happening, it was like I was going in a totally altered state. And then I saw, that those souls, that because the Katars have all been reincarnated again, because they said they would come to bring the light and love back to humanity. And they are all here. But I saw it so clearly that there were 12 women that were gathered there, in a circle. And they were all given the oath, made an oath there, that they would return and they would bring the power of love back to humanity as the divine feminine returns. And that is exactly what is happening. But it was just, to me, a symbol of what unity does. When we all open our hearts and we start working from the heart space, everything is different. It moves into a higher frequency band where we can live in a higher frequency band so that the lower cannot move in there anymore. They cannot go up. They cannot tune into that. So that is the power of love that is being returned. And what is even more powerful is when you become the love that changes the world in your own way.
Yes.
So thank you very much for inviting me.
Oh, thank you for being with us and for sharing. That's the epitome of the purpose of this show, View from Love. Yeah, let's do our little hearts. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Judith. And we look so forward to having you back. Anyone who'd like to get to know Judith, dive into her books. I will leave the links to Amazon and to her website if you're interested in any soul consultations. They're incredible. Can't get enough of the beauty and wisdom that you are, Judith. You are just love embodied, and we're all so grateful that you're here and grateful that you joined us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you again. God bless you.